Well, I'm joined for the rest of this MCLE by Ed Burns. Ed is a business and litigation attorney in Oceanside. We've worked on a number of things together. Ed, could you give us a little idea about your background and what you've been doing for the last decade or so of your life?
Well, I've been representing all types of manufacturers and distributors of products in litigation and contracts and advice to keep them out of litigation, everything from products liability to distribution to helping them write adequate warnings for their products to comply with the local and state and federal laws.
All right, great. So the drone is a brand new field for all of us. I mean, drones have really only been popular for the last 3 years or so, and so we're all trying to have to figure out our roles as lawyers, how we might fit into this scenario here. And so one of the problems with doing an MCLE on drones is by the time they finish editing it and putting it out there, probably half the material we're going to give you is going to be an antique and has undoubtedly been overridden in one way or the other by some pending legislation or court cases or FAA rulings or something like that. So as of today, we're going to talk about what's going on with state and federal laws for starters. Now, until earlier last year, it wasn't even clear that FAA had jurisdiction over drones, but the Perker case seems to have established that FAA truly does have jurisdiction over drones. However, what we're seeing is a lot of the state and local laws popping up that may or may not have validity when compared with FAA. So, Ed, I know you've done some research on, both some of the national offices like Fish and Wildlife as well as some of the local city ordinances. Can you give us a rough idea of kind of what's going on now?
Well, yeah, since the Perker case, the FAA has decided that it is going to treat drones like any other unmanned aircraft system, which makes sense, and so just like
kind of what they are,
right? So anything that could fly into airspace, and they've long regulated airspace with respect to model airplanes, either wire guided or free flying. Kites, there's regulations about flying kites within federal airspace. So the next logical step is drones, and as far as what the state and local governments are going to be allowed to do, the general parameters are fairly well defined with respect to the state and federal powers. So the federal government preempts state law on matters that it issues regulation. The states do retain some power with respect to land use, zoning, privacy, safety, and law enforcement.
Okay.
So as long as the laws stay within those areas, they will be at least facially valid as not being preempted. Then you have the issue of the application of those laws. So, for example, a city might write a law that says drones are prohibited to protect the privacy rights of its citizens. So you can't have any cameras on any drones anywhere. Well, all right, it sounds on its face like it could be valid. It's certainly one of the categories
related to privacy.
It's one of the categories that the locals are allowed to regulate. But people don't have privacy rights when they're in the public at a park or on the beach. So at least from a hobbyist standpoint, that would probably not be a valid ordinance.
Yeah, I mean, if you fly a drone over a beach and there's a surfing contest down there and you use your drone to take pictures of the surfing contest and you fly your drone at 30 feet where you're basically getting the same perspective as somebody with a telephoto lens standing on the 30-foot cliff overlooking the surf contest.
Right, and then so the issue, then you get into issues distinguishing what is the person taking those pictures with the drone permitted to do with them, and we can talk about commercial versus hobbyist, and the regulations, regarding those. In other words, the hobbyist could take pictures for their own personal use of the surf contest and the beach. They would not be able to use them for commercial use.
Right. One of the really interesting things to me about the way that FAA is currently trying to delineate between a commercial use and a hobbyist is that if you fly drones commercially, you need something called a 333 exemption that may be going away soon. FAA, as I mentioned earlier, just came out with, it looks like the final version of Part 107 that may end up basically making a 333 unnecessary. However, right now, to be a hobbyist, you cannot accept money for taking pictures with your drone or anything like that. We're having, even here in San Diego County, we're having a couple of kind of tight situations where we've got people who don't have 333 exemptions who are out taking pictures of the coastline, and they're actually putting out books for sale of their drone photography. And the rationale being given is that at the time they took the picture, they didn't intend to commercially exploit it, but they changed their mind after seeing how beautiful their pictures were. And now they're selling their pictures in art galleries and putting out books of their pictures. So to the best of my knowledge, FAA has not written any nasty letters or anything like that, but the delineation between commercial use, hobbyist use, and the hobbyists who change their mind and suddenly become commercial but still don't want to pay for the 333 exemptions is kind of a tenuous one in my mind.
Yeah, I think the FAA is going to have some trouble with that. I think, certainly with respect to unmanned drones that are taking pictures, it's very similar to just a regular photographer.
Yeah.
And as long as the FAA, as long as the commercial photographer, the hobbyist taking pictures who later changes his mind, is not flying in a no-fly zone, and not violating the other air rules that traditionally the FAA regulates, I think the FAA is going to have a very difficult time stopping that commerce.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing about that too is even though these laws have been in effect for a long time, to the best of my knowledge, FAA has not taken any action against anyone for the commercial versus hobbyist issue. Instead, they will take action on the careless and reckless requirement. And quite frankly, I think that's valid. I mean, the YouTube is full of videos taken from drones that clearly shouldn't have been flown in the manner they're being flown. As a matter of fact, I have on one of my websites an award for Dridiot of the Month, which is a drone flying idiot of the month, and I give it to the person who uses the drone in the most stupid manner that I can find. So we've got, one of the winners was the guy who had a few drinks and flew a drone into the White House tree. We've got pop singers who tried to catch drones in contests and cut their hands open. The winner for 1 month was the person who crashed the drone into a tennis match. We've had drones falling on ski slopes behind skiers. And probably the scariest video was somebody who took a drone in Chile and flew it the opposite direction in traffic and decided to try to slalom through the trucks and cars that were approaching it. So, if FAA is looking to regulate for careless and reckless, there are plenty of examples out there. And fortunately or unfortunately, most of those examples, the proof is the YouTube video that's out there.
Right. So the FAA, regulates airspace, obviously, and so I think what they're trying to do is establish rules so, they're after the bigger fish, right? The Amazons, these companies that are going to be flying unmanned aircraft, delivering packages, and truly participating in commerce as opposed to photographers. And I think to the extent that people are doing really dangerous things, the FAA is only going to be able to do so much.
Right.
The local governments you're going to see local ordinances about. You can't fly drones down the street under overpasses. Under overpasses and within 10 feet of a highway or 100 feet of a freeway. Those are the types of rules and regulations and municipal ordinances I think we're going to start seeing.
What kind of ordinances are we seeing right now, and what do you think about the constitutionality of some of these?
Well, there's several cities in California have made attempts to write ordinances. Everything. Well, Poway just enacted one recently that the purpose of it was to not prevent interference with emergency services. They have fires there every few years, and the last thing that the firefighters or anybody wants is some hobbyist flying their drone up and getting in the way. And that's fair. That's going to be upheld. Sure. If you and your son are flying a drone in the park on a day like today, and there's no fires and there's no emergency services, and the police show up and issue you a ticket, I think there's going to be a problem. But again, that's with respect to how it's enforced.
Sure. No, that makes sense. Yeah, I've been hearing through the drone channels that there are some cities that have just had outright bans. I believe that Poway initially said we're just going to ban drones, and then kind of scale that back to we'll ban drones when they're endangering firefighting equipment, which out in Poway, it's a valid concern. There are a lot of steep hills there, and one drone going into a helicopter blade is going to cause trouble. So
right, and the city of Poway is going to hire commercially licensed drone pilots to fly over natural disasters such as a fire, so that the firefighters have more information. But you don't want
Joe Hobbyist,
20 Joe Hobbyists, having drones that are up there interfering with that commercial pilot's legitimate interest in preventing those fires. But an outright ban, even in the name of public safety, is not going to fly. That will not be upheld.